Hey guys, and welcome back to the garage. Today's video is going to be on compressed air systems, mainly the compressor, piping, hose reels, connections, and everything you're going to need to do a setup in your garage. So I'm going to show you the setup I got, and hopefully this will give you some good tips, tricks, different things to buy, what to look for in a compressor for your garage. So let's go ahead and take a look at that, and I'll show you what I got. Alright, so walking over to the area where I have the compressor set up. I have it tucked away in kind of the corner of the garage over here, the front corner. So this is it. It's a 60-gallon Ingersoll Rand, 5 horsepower, 220 volt, 2-stage compressor. Puts out 175 psi at 14.7 CFM. And I have that plumbed out here, tank valve, pressure gauge, and I've got 2 stations here. One reducing station I just have kind of as a spare for running a separate hose that I don't really use, and then this is the main station here that has a filter dryer and goes through a pressure regulating valve, through a hose, and into the hard plumbed piping that I have running up into the attic, and then over to the hose reel stations I have set up in my work area. So we'll go back to the compressor a little bit. I use mostly air tools in my garage, so impact gun, air ratchet, the little P grinders, die grinders, cleaning up parts, cutting material. So I chose to go with a 60-gallon compressor. This is obviously going to be depicted on what you're going to do with the air. If you're just going to fill up tires and maybe just do some small stuff, use a nail gun or whatever, you're probably not going to need something this big. But for what I do, this was the size I thought would be most useful and applicable to the jobs I'm doing. It's a 2-stage compressor, so you have a low pressure piston, high pressure piston. Air crosses over and gets discharged out here to the tank. 30 volt electric motor, and that I have just plumbed in here. Had the electricians put in a drop, and that goes to the sub panel for all the 220 stuff fed off for the garage. Has a standard gauge on the tank and a pressure switch to shut it down when it gets to 175 psi, and I think it cuts in about 120, so the range is 120 to 175. So next let's talk a little bit about the plumbing. So coming out of the compressor, obviously you can just use a regulator down with a quick connect fitting to run your air hose. I decided to go with the hard plumbing route and have hose reels mounted at my work areas. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I have the discharge pressure gauge reading from the tank side, and then another one for the station pressure reading what I have out to the line at the station. So I set that about 100, sometimes a little more than that from running impact. And then this all is 1/2-inch piping here. So an important step in plumbing your compressor is to not make any choke points until it gets to the air tool. You want the air tool to be the choke point in the system, not anything upstream, because then that's going to affect your volume of flow, your air, basically your driving force to push that piece of tooling. So this coming out is all 1/2-inch line coming out through the filter dryer, the regulator, goes into a 1/2-inch hose. So we have a flex mount, and then goes into this little air manifold here with a drain valve, and this is actually all 3/4 tubing running through. So we'll go into reasons for running a regulator. Well, most air tools are designed to take around 100 psi. You'll even see sometimes stickers on them that say maximum pressure 90 or 100 psi. So we're coming out of the tank here, that's 175, and then we're stepping down with the regulator to about 100, which is the working pressure of the tool. Obviously you're going to have line loss through the piping, so we could probably bump that up a little more and still be safe once it reached the tool. But the other thing with doing this is that when I step this pressure down, now I'm holding the pressure in the tank, basically not going to short cycle the compressor as much on and off. So I keep the high pressure the high energy air in the tank, and then I have a working pressure for the air tools step down here. So that's going to conserve the air and the high pressure, high energy air in the tank and just step it down to what I need running my air tools. So it's going to keep the air tools safe. It's also going to prevent the compressor from kicking on and off if I were to use the air at 175 instead of stepping it down to the correct pressure I need for my tools. So then we'll talk about the hardline. It's a system called MaxLine. I actually got it off Amazon for about 150 bucks for the kit. So it comes with the tubing, it comes with the nuts, it comes with the manifold, the drain valve, and basically, also clips to keep the piping aligned. And that set runs up. I decided to plumb it in through the attic instead of across the ceiling to make it a little more aesthetically pleasing. And then if you see over here in front of the lift bay where I have my car, I have a drop coming down here, goes to another manifold and then directly out into the hose reel where you have your air basically on demand. So that set again costs 150 bucks off Amazon, obviously depending on the length. It's a 3/4 inch line size, so there's no restriction or anything. The choke point here would be going down out of the manifold into the hose. These are just, I believe this is 1/4 or maybe 3/8 hose, so that's 3/4. So no restriction there, and you also got a little drain line so you can bleed off any condensation moisture in your lines. And then I also have another one down here by my toolbox and workbench. So there's another one, pretty much same setup. Drop through the ceiling to a manifold, hard piped into the hose reel, and then you have your air on tap right here. So now back to the air line. The reason I chose this larger 3/4 tubing is that I didn't want any choke points early on in my system. I wanted the choke point to be at the air tool, not back here by the compressor, because it does have to go up and over. It's probably a 30-foot run and then maybe a 50-foot run over to the other station. So if I choked that down and only ran a 1/4 inch, say, air hose or a smaller 3/8 or 1/2 inch line, then that would be a big long restriction. I'd have to up my air pressure on my system to be able to get the correct pressure and volume at the tool. Important thing to realize when you're plumbing your compressed air system, setting one up or anything like that, is to understand the relationship between pressure and volume. So the pressure you have in your tank is great and all, but if you can't deliver that pressure at a fixed volume to drive whatever piece of machining you're trying to do, whether it's an impact gun, an air ratchet, maybe a bead-blast cabinet, really you're not going to have the energy there to do the work. So the idea behind the way I have my setup is I have my high pressure, high energy air stored in the tank, then I step that down to a usable working pressure around 100 psi through a big fat 3/4 inch line, and then it steps down to the air hose to the tool. So I don't have any choke points in my system, so I can use a lower pressure air at a higher volume rate to create the same amount of work as high pressure air through a small volume rate would create. The volume is the important thing when running a big air tool like an impact gun. If you got it choked up through a little 1/4 inch line, you'd have to jack the pressure up higher and higher to get the amount of oomph into that impact gun to do the work, to break the rusty bolts free or whatever you're doing. So the important thing is the volume air at a good rated pressure. So that 90 psi that gun is calling for is also calling for a specific volume, so you could have enough driving force to break that bolt free. So it's an important relationship to look at when you're plumbing your system, that you don't have any choke points back by the compressor, that you're giving enough air at a good rated pressure and volume to the piece of tool you're doing to make sure it's going to work for you. So the next thing I want to do is just run the compressor. If this maybe is something you are interested in setting up, which I'd assume it is because you're watching a video on it. So I'm going to run the air. I'm basically going to hook up an impact gun, just spool it up until the pressure drops enough to kick the pressure switch on and light the compressor off. And just so you can get an audible understanding of how loud maybe one of these size unit is, vice one of the smaller compressors you get at Home Depot, so you can see if, hey, maybe this is going to be too loud for my shop or whatever you may think, so you can get an understanding of what they sound like. So walk over to the toolbox. We'll grab a impact gun. So as you can see, obviously I like running air tools. I'm sure we'll get somebody to comment in here, oh, you should be using Milwaukee Fuel, air tool stuff is dead, they create the same amount of power. Well, maybe we can do another video reviewing that and see if we could get the same amount of oomph out of one of these as the new Milwaukee impacts. So compressor is back over there, so we'll just set this up on this hose here. So, oh, you can see also on the back of this one, see 90 psi rated. Alright, so now we got the compressor running. Go stand in this corner of the garage. We'll walk around a little bit. So this is how it sounds. If you're working, pulling tires off or whatever, breaking bolts free, the kick's on. And it'll run for a few minutes till it gets up to pressure. And we'll walk over here a little closer. And we'll go right up near it. And there it is. That's all it takes to pump it up. I think it kicks on at 120, shuts off about 175. And for any of you guys down here in Florida, you don't know the struggle we're dealing with the weather right now. It's just all day. But anyway, back to the garage. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them down in the comments and I'll be sure to get back to you and answer them. I've had this set up here in my garage for about 5 or 6 years, so it's been a tested method. I've been using it. I haven't had any issues with that compressor. It's been running flawlessly. I drain the tank maybe every couple months, and you know the humidity down here in Florida, it gets hot, humid, so you're soaking up all that moisture out of the air when you're compressing your air. That has not been an issue with this compressor. I've been using it, run my air tools, I run my scat blast cabinet with it, impact gun, grinder, sander, all that stuff. So this has been a tested method. I haven't had any issues with it, so hopefully you guys can use this and get a setup in your garage for running compressed air. Hope you liked the video.